Let's hope. We're live. So, welcome everyone. And hello, Odon. Thank you so much for joining me. I know that it's been, we've had to postpone a bit. But in the meantime, I've had various personal issues and health issues and travel, extensive travel. I just came back from the Czech Republic. And I was in Mongolia. So yeah, I've had a lot to do. But thank you for joining us. We're here today to discuss your book, The Great Secret of Islam, which I've read. I had the honor of being a proofreader. I agree with like 99% of what's in there. I mean, with minor sort of, as you had my thoughts on that. I think it's a fantastic thesis. It is a very thorough thesis. It is a very logical, consistent thesis that follows history, follows facts. So yeah, please introduce yourself and talk about the book as we discussed. And thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, Lloyd. Thanks a lot. I think your audience might be a bit familiar with me already, but what could I say? I have a background in business strategy, so I am not an academic scholar per se. I am something else. Even though I abide by the exact same scientific method, I don't have the same goal. You see, when scholars look into early Islam, it's like someone looking at a forest and trying to understand what the forest is. So they study every tree, every trunk, every leaf, every species of tree, and so on. What I try to do, because of this background of mine as a former strategy consultant, is to get the big picture of the forest. And so we have ways in the strategy consulting business to identify the main forces, what really counts. And what I try to do is to fathom, to picture the big picture. What actually happened in early Islam, which leads to understanding what the very deep nature of what the very deep nature of Islam is, what it is exactly. I should say that I've worked with a very interesting Belgian scholar who has become a mentor and a friend to me, Edouard Marie-Galès, who in his time, in 2005, published a groundbreaking thesis, Le Messie et son prophète, the Messiah and his prophet. And at this time, what he did is collecting almost everything that the 2004 scholarship had done on early Islam. And he tried to make his own synthesis. And what he did is sort of connecting the dots, assembling the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. And he did it also, he did it with, he looked at some scholarship, some researches that are almost unknown in the West. There is something very new in his approach because he worked with Eastern Christian scholars who worked on the Quran and who understood the Quran for what it literally means. Whereas in the West, most scholars, almost all scholars, are still trapped within the Islamic interpretation of the Quran. And those rare Western scholars who try to think freely, they do not dare to engage the Quran and to see and to understand what it literally means, because there is something very, very peculiar in the Quran and in the Western approach of it.
Yeah. Can I ask a question? Your mentor, Mr. Professor Galez, you said.
Did he suffer? He's not a professor. He has done a PhD in theology and history of religions. He's an academic scholar in the sense that he publishes articles in peer-reviewed magazines and books and so on.
Yeah.
But he's not teaching.
Professor, but did he suffer any kind of academic backlash or any kind of pressure from his peers to make him back off from this
academic career since he is not a teacher? Actually, he's a cleric from the Saint John congregation, the Friars of Saint John, les Frères de Saint Jean, and he's within his own congregation. He suffered some backlash because of his ideas, but his ideas go way beyond Islam. He is also very proficient in early Christianity, and I became also very interested in this field of study. I'm the president of an organization that study early Christianity. The name is ECHO, EECHO. And what we have uncovered about Islam, early Islam, it's based partially based on the study of early Christianity. The study of early Christianity leads us to understand the actual religious context of 6th century, 7th century Middle East. Yeah, this is the ECHO website. Of course, it's in French. There is something going on this website. We are working on a new version, and there will be English translation of at least the main articles. But if you come back to the header, please, Lloyd, just come back to the header. Just look at this image. You see that there is the ECHO logo with the boat of Peter, but mostly there are two images that deserve a little comment. On the right, it's an oratory that was found in Pompeii, in Italy, where the volcano submerged two cities. And this has been found in a villa that is forbidden to the public. It's on the right, and it dates from the eruption of the volcano, which is the year 80. I don't remember exactly. And on the left, what you see is a sculpture which has been found in China. Actually, it's part of a huge sculpture on a cliff. The characters you see are several meters high. And on the left, it is Saint Thomas. On the right, it is his deacon. And the sculpture, it's like a comic strip, depicts the coming of Saint Thomas around the year 60 in China. He was summoned by the stepbrother of the emperor, who wanted to know about Christianity, who converted himself to Christianity. And there is an amazing story of the coming of Saint Thomas and the very early development of Christianity in China in the first century. This sculpture is in Kongwan Shan on the coast, on the northern coast of China. And in this sculpture, you find the earliest depiction of Jesus. He is depicted as lying dead, like in the kind of the same as in the Torino shroud.
Yeah.
And there is also a depiction of Mary holding baby Jesus. You see, this is something really groundbreaking. And this has been discovered something like 14 or 16 years ago. There have been many books and some scholars working on it, but it's been only 3 years since an international conference took place in Rome, in the Vatican. The conference was held by the historical committee for historical science in the Vatican. So it was an international conference with scholars from all around the world. And there they debated the hypothesis that this sculpture actually is a piece of evidence for the coming of St. Thomas in China and the development of Christianity there in the first century. So you see, this is something like a basis for our later Islamic studies, but you see that we are living some very exciting times.
That is incredible.
Many things
the historical and archaeological evidence
Mm-hmm.
over the last 20 years is just amazing, and it's coming faster and faster.
It's coming faster and faster. It also faces huge opposition. For example, this sculpture, the image you see is a recent image, but it doesn't show the sculpture as it was, because in the 80s, the communist regime damaged the sculpture. Actually, it was something terrible that was done. They used high pressure
hoses, water
guns on the cliff. Supposedly, they wanted to clean the sculpture, but what they did is they erased most of the details. Luckily, we have pictures and stampings from before, but it also tells us that what we are uncovering, whether on early Christianity or on early Islam, is something very explosive. it faced huge opposition from powers that don't want to see the historical truth.
That's incredible. Have you watched the Japanese movie, movie set in Japan, feudal Japan, called Silenced?
Yes.
Where that was an amazing film. So, I mean, it shows that there was this very strong, nascent Christian, shall we say, budding Christian community, and then it got wiped out. And do you think that happened in China as well?
It wasn't wiped out in China. Actually, the Chinese church underwent very, very harsh persecutions. In the 4th century, for example, all the Christian men were killed. They had this idea in China that the women were harmless, and so they killed all the men, all the priests, all the bishops, but also all the men. And they did it again another time, and because of this, the church went underground there very, very soon. Centuries before communism and Mao Zedong, the Christian church was already underground. When the Jesuits came in the 16th century, they found no trace of Christianity, even though the emperor knew about Christianity because he knew about the underground church. And it took 100 years, a century, maybe a bit more than a century, for a local Christian, a local Chinese Christian, to ask a Jesuit priest about his creed and whether he was really a Christian or not. And the Jesuit then realized that there was already a church. They were starting something of their own, the Jesuits. They were starting their own evangelization process with the authorization of the emperor. And they didn't know about the underground church. I think nowadays there must be something like 60 to maybe 90 millions Christians in the underground church in China. But what is really interesting here is that China was knew about Christianity since its beginnings, its very beginnings. And so Christianity sort of influenced China, even from the underground, and it gives us another reality of China. It's a bit like the ancient Japan you were talking about.
Yeah. Well, remember the Chinese in the 1400s, after Qing He finished his round-the-world voyage, because I believe he made the first round-the-world voyage, after they returned, the Chinese emperor erased almost every single record they could find of, and then they became very insular, so they erased all records of the past of China. So there must be a lot of history that's been destroyed since then.
Yes and no, because in China there used to be a sort of system with imperial archives, and it was a almost a sacred thing, and they were to be copied and recopied every 3 or 4 centuries. And because of this, we still have evidence of the coming of Christianity in the 1st century. It is described in these archives. So I'm not a specialist of the topic. You should read the works of Pierre Perrier, for example, or look for the books that will be published from the Vatican conference I was telling you about. It is to be published within 1 year, maybe.
Okay.
With all the articles from the scholar. It's not exclusively on the evangelization of China in the 1st century, but there will be articles about it there. Or you can look for it in the Echo website. There are many articles about the Kongwanshan sculpture, about the underground church in China, and so on. But it's kind of funny.
That is very interesting. Yeah. Of course, you know what? It's just a website that I'll just bring this up. This is the 1421 Foundation, where they've done a huge amount of research on the history of China and the voyage of discovery of Qing He. And where people can go there, they can they can read about it. It is phenomenal. It's amazing. So let's get back to Islam, because as you know, Muslims are going to let us know that the Chinese emperor was actually a Muslim. You know, so because so yeah. So then you wrote your first copy of this book in 2014. So how did you connect from Dr. Galez, I think it was you said, to writing your own book?
So what happened is I took an interest in Islam almost 20 years ago because I had Muslim colleagues and discussions with them. I read the Quran around 2007, and it took me 2 or 3 pages to realize something was a bit odd. It didn't match with the discourse that my Muslim colleagues and friends were telling me. And so because I was curious, because I wanted to understand, because I was a strategy consultant at the time, I wanted to know how it began. And I think the solution to this oddities was to be found in the origins of Islam. And so I took an interest around 2009, 2010 in the scholarly efforts to uncover early Islam. There I found the thesis of Edouard Marie Galez. It's a huge thesis. It's more than 1,000 pages with 1,500 footnotes. So it's a lot to absorb. But when I read it, it was the first time I saw some light on the topic. Then I managed to meet him, and I wrote a synthesis of his work. It was my first book was mostly a vulgarization, an adaptation of his thesis for the general public. And by doing so, I also came to read many more studies, meet many more scholars, and as the years passed, I kept on working as a strategy consultant. But in my free time, I kept on reading, attending conferences, meeting scholars, and so I understood that the book I wrote, which was merely a synthesis of Edouard Marie Gallet's 2004 work, needed an update. It needed to be updated in the light of new research, because there is something going on in the field of scholarship, scientific scholarship about early Islam since 20 years, since the internet, actually. And many new things have been discovered. Archaeological discoveries, works have been done on early manuscripts of the Quran, for example. There are new historical studies. We better understand the historical context and so on. And so the new discoveries kept piling up. And this the work I had done with Edouard Marie Gallet needed a very serious update, which I did in 2020. And this needed also an English adaptation, which is what I published, The Great Secret of Islam, this summer in English. Okay. And you see, at first, I worked as a strategy consultant, doing only a sort of synthesis of someone else's work. But what I did in 2020 and with the English book is also a personal work. I kept on working with Edouard Marie Gallet. He fully agrees with the book. But what I did is I took his work, what he did on the Quran, for example, and I kept on working on it myself. You had Murad on your channel recently. I also had a chat with him. And it's funny because we did kind of the same work. Obviously, I did not translate the Quran, but I did a concordance of the Quran for some very specific expressions based on Edouard Marie Gallet's work, early work, I would say. I did an extensive study. He only studied some verses or many verses of the Quran. I did the work for the whole Quran. For example, I looked for every mention of the root kataba, which gives kitab scripture, which gives, for example, the al-kitab, people of the scripture. And we see that the use of this root defines several categories of believers within the text. This is what the literal, the study of the literal meaning of the Quran is about. And I did exactly what Murad did. I built a concordance for some expressions. So I did this for the Kitab and the Al-Kitab. I did this for the Mushrikun and the Shirk, the associationists, and the sin of associating another god to God. I did this for the Beit, Al-Beit, the house, the temple. I did it for 10 or 15 key expressions in the Quran. Yeah, this is my book. And I'm working actually on wrapping all of this in an academic paper because it needs an academic publication. Edouard Marie Gallet did such a paper, but only on the kufa expression. What does kafara mean in the Quran exactly? What does it literally mean? It does not mean being an infidel. This is the Islamic interpretation of the word. Actually, and Murad agrees with me, it means to, kafara means to cover. So a kufar is someone who covers. We see in the text that mostly it refers to Jews covering their own scriptures with something else, with other scriptures, or with interpretations of the ancient scriptures that the authors of the Quran do not agree with. And because of this, most Jews in the text are deemed coverers, kufar, evildoers. But the construction of Islam, the reinterpretation of the Quran by Islamic scholars, led the built another meaning for the expression. Basically, for Muslim, kufar means non-Muslim, unbeliever, infidel, denier.
I mean, one could say that there's just a few points on that. On the one hand, Muslims are claiming that the Jews covered certain texts, let's say, right? But then Muslims are also including in the Quran Gnostic, Midrashic, and often even just legendary, mythical children's tales. And they're claiming that this is the authentic expression of the Bible and of Christianity, and that the Jews are covering that up. I mean, in this case, the Jews are not covering up. The Jews are simply saying that that's not authentic. So Muslims have it backwards in one sense, and in another sense, they've also covered up their own history. They've also covered up the origins of, I mean, for instance, where's the original Quran? Muslims don't have it. Where's the Mohammedan Quran? Nobody knows. Where is even the Uthmani Quran? Well, they don't have that either, right? What about the Quran after Uthman? Well, we've got pieces here and there. So, and now the Quran is what, exactly 100 years old and 2 months today? I mean, it's, you know, it's really, they've only got and then even the Quran they have is not from one of the original Qira'at, it's from one of the transmitters, it's Sarawaya. So it's not even one of the strongest strands, it's from a secondary strand from a student of one of the transmitters. I mean, from a student of one of the Qira'at. So there's an hypocrisy there. Sorry?
Yeah, you're talking about the Qira'at and so on. You're saying that the 1924 edition of the Quran could be a non-authentic one, but this is according to Islam's tradition about the Quran and about its origins. And what I've put forward in my book is the real story of it. Actually, there never were. Maybe there were some reciters and qira'ats and so on, but what the Quran is completely different from what the tradition has put up.
So before we go there, let's come back to that point, like what the Quran is. But your book, first of all, I mean, tell us what makes your book compelling. What is the main thesis of your book? Because clearly it says that there is a story to the Quran. There are contradictions. There are new discoveries that lead to a completely different interpretation of the origins of Islam. There are sources of Islam that are not acknowledged, that should be. So what is your book about? I mean, what's the compelling case? Why should people read it? And what are you offering? And what for you was the most mind-blowing discoveries that you made that you felt I had to share this with the world?
I think the most mind-blowing discovery is the influence of a very small Jewish current in early Islam. There was an alliance between those people who are named in the Quran as Nasara. Actually, they are not Christians, but they were Judeo-Nazarenes, Jews who recognized Jesus as the Messiah, but who were not Christian, who did not recognize him as God. And we have the relation in the Quran of an alliance having been made between some Arabs and those people, the Judeo-Nazarene. This alliance aimed at rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem, so as to hasten the end of times. It's a very common Jewish topic, to hasten, to precipitate the end of times. And so actually what it led us, it leads us to understand is that Jesus, as the Messiah, as the actor of the end, the figure of the end of time, was completely central to early Islam, very early Islam, up until the 640s, maybe even up to the end of the 7th century. Jesus was the central figure of early Islam, and because he did not come back as the expected Messiah who should have established God's reign on earth, because he did not come back, the Arab leaders took it upon themselves to establish God's reign instead of the Messiah. This is what the caliphs did, and mostly the first of them, Abd al-Malik. And by doing so, they needed a divine justification, a new legitimation for their power. And so they invented Islam as a religion which was created ex post. So it is a complete construction that reinterprets, that is reinterpreting, the events of the 7th century, and recreates a new history. What they did is they needed actually the caliphs, the successor of Abdul Malik, they inherited a sort of divine power from Abdul Malik himself, who was a huge figure in early Islam. But they needed a divine legitimation for the power they had, especially the Abbasids.
Right.
And because of this, they had the idea that God must have given them this power. So they needed a divine revelation to justify that power. But when you invent a divine revelation, you need a prophet for this, and you need also something to support for the revelation. They needed a sacred book, and they needed circumstances for the revelation. They needed to write the life of their prophet, and so on. And this is how Islam came to life, came into being. Islam as the religion we know, with the appearance we know, was an invention from the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th century. And even today, Islam keeps on being invented by Islamic scholars who keeps on finding new stuff in the Quran, new ideas. For example, if you take the case of the scientific miracles in the Quran, this is something very interesting, because it shows us how Islam was invented. It comes from a logic of backward construction. You have the conclusion. The conclusion is Islam is God's given religion to mankind. This is the conclusion. So, because of this, the Quran must be a divine revelation. So, because it is a divine revelation, there must be something miraculous in it. And so,
one issue I have with one issue I have is that Muslims will typically say God, like in the Sirah, they say God, when really what they mean is Allah, because clearly they're very different characters with very different moral foundations, very different views of the world and of people and so on. And it's just like when people say Islamist when they mean Muslim. When we use words, they try to use words to try to create a similarity that isn't there, or they try to create an artificial distinction that isn't there. So it's really Allah. I prefer that, just, because I Muslims try to say God, they try to say, but we're just like you Christians. We also believe in
You can
Jesus.
say Allah, but Allah is also, it's the name of God in Arabic.
Yeah, but within Arabic, they know that Allah is not a personal name. It's an article, like the God, Jehovah, right? The God Yahweh. Whereas in Islam, within the Arabic, it's the personal name. It's the name of the deity. So the contexts are completely different for the two.
This is what Islam has created. In the 7th century, I think the name Allah only meant the one God. But the making of Islam transformed this word into the personal name of the Islam's God.
Although Allah was well known, Allah was a well-known deity long before Islam came along. I mean, there was the Allah of the Kaaba, right? He was the Allah, the main God, the chief God of the Kaaba, who at that point was called Hubal, which is a variant of Baal, right? So the Allah of the Kaaba was, so if you look, even in the Sirah, they acknowledge, they just call him Allah or they call him Hubal, but that was the God at the time when Muhammad was a young boy. And then later on, right, that became a different Allah.
You see, it's true. There were some pagan customs and pagan gods, but Allah is also the name of God in Arabic as the one God. It is exactly the same name as Allah in Aramaic, or Elohim in for the Jews. It's exactly the same. And what I discovered is that it's more than most, every Arab in the 7th century had been Christianized. There were no more pagan religious practices in the 7th century. But when you look into it, it seems natural. You just have to look at. No, excuse me. I won't. This is not the time for a long ramble on the effect of Christianity. But let's just say that Western scholars all agree nowadays that most Arabs were Christianized. You just have to look, for example, at
there's 4th century, 5th century evidence of Christianity all over Arabia, Jordan, Petra, in that region. There's evidence for that.
When they use the word Allah, it was in a monotheistic, Christian-like fashion, or even in a Christian way. Just have to look at this. At the end of the 6th century, there was a huge coalition of Arabs that emerged under the reign of Numan III. You can look in my book. And this Arab king from the Lahmid tribe was baptized, which tells us something very, very deep about the Christianization of the Arabs. It was finished at the time. When the king of all Arabs becomes Christians, it means every Arab at the time was Christian. Yeah, there are many evidence of early of Christianity among the Arabs. And besides, we have absolutely no archaeological evidence for pagan customs in the 6th or 7th century among Arabs. We have, for example, the Petra temples, pagan temples, but they were not used in the 6th or the 7th century. If you look at Julien Christian Robin's work, he is a major archaeologist who specialized in early Islam in Arabia and also early Christianity. This is what he wrote in Le Coran des Historiens, for example. Le Coran des historiens is a major book, the historians' Quran, that was published, it's 5 years ago in France. It is an international project led by Guillaume D and Mohamed Ali Amir Mouedzi, two major French Islamologists who gathered the contributions of around 30 scholars from all around the world. And it's a sort of synthesis of what they knew about early Islam at the time. And in this book, you will find Julien Christian Robin's contribution, an article about his archaeological findings in Arabia, where he states that there is no sign, no evidence for any pagan activity among Arabs at the time. Whereas he has found, and others have found many evidence for Arab Christian and Arab Jewish activities in the 6th and the 7th centuries. But this is also what we get from the sources. The sources tells us about the evangelization of the Arabs, which began in the 1st century, but which there were Arab bishops, for example. We have their names.
So there is a very strong push in academia to deny that Arabia was heavily Christianized very early on, like in the 3rd, 4th century. There's this effort to sort of deny the spread of Christianity in that region, in that period. But it was extensive, especially the Ethiopians were possibly the very first country to become Christianized. They had a complete Bible, and in the 3rd century, they had moved into and ultimately conquered Arabia. So they were very strong militarily, socially, culturally, economically, and they had taken troops, their Bible, their priests with them. So there was a Bible, if not in English or if not in Arabic, there was certainly an Ethiopic Bible in the Ge'ez in that region in the 3rd or 4th century already. And notice here, this is just one of a few that have recently been discovered in recent years. Ancient Christian monastery discovered in al Qawain. I've been here many times, not to this particular site, but I used to live in the UAE. I lived there for 11 years. And there are numerous of these monasteries now being discovered. They're in Saudi Arabia, they're in Bahrain, they're in UAE, they're all over the place. They were buried. So Christianity had strong footholds until, I would say, the Muslims came along and just got rid of them, quietly buried the evidence.
But one of the most compelling pieces of evidence for the Christianization of Arab is the Quran itself. When you look at the Quran, you see that it features very sophisticated, very complex Christian concepts, such as the Holy Spirit, such as the Messiah, such as the virginal birth of Jesus. And you see that these concepts are understood by the audience. It doesn't need explanation, which means that the audience was acquainted to them because it had been Christianized. I won't say that they were completely Orthodox and Christian, that they attended every masses and so on, but they had been Christianized. Otherwise, the Quran could not have gotten a sort of grip within this audience.
Right, understood. I wonder, can I ask you, because there's also the question of what is the Quran we were touching on earlier. Because it's the book, I mean, because we can have many of these discussions. I mean, this is such a broad and amazing topic. I mean, the archaeology, the history, and I mean, there's room to bicker about details, but the broad thesis that you present, I think, is incredible. It's very solid, very well researched. Can we go just look at each chapter and just tell the audience what each chapter basically touches on? So maybe you can talk.
Firstly, we could just say to the audience that they can download the book for free on my website. If they want a hard copy, it is available on Amazon, but the PDF version, which is the same, is available for free on my website, which is thegreatsecretofislam.com. And so they will get the same copy as yours, a PDF file with, for example, this page. And And what exactly do you want me to comment on?
Just to give people a view as to what the book covers. If we go just a brief discussion of each chapter.
Okay.
So
there is a first part. What does Islam claim about itself? Which is a sort of grand introduction. It's basically because it has to be put forward when one writes such a book. It's basically Islam, the Islamic tradition, what the Islamic tradition tells about the origins of Islam, and what we can gather from it. And thereafter, what I try to do in the part called The Great Secret of Islam, which is the main part of the book, is to unravel another history. I start with the biblical tradition. I explain what this biblical tradition was in the year 30. And there is something very important here, because it's the beginning of Christianity. And if you don't understand, you don't have to be a Christian to understand this. It's not a matter of Christian faith, but you have to understand that the Christians changed the game, sort of. They introduced new ideas, particularly the idea of salvation, which did not exist before them, and which changed the way other religions worked, and which changed how new religions developed. And because of this new idea, Judaism was completely changed, and new currents emerged within Judaism. For example, Judeo-Nazarenism. Judeo-Nazarenism emerged shortly after the beginnings of Christianity. So this is my French website. If you go just on the
top right, it says English website, French website. Yeah.
No, it's because you just click on
I did a translation now. I did a translation, yeah.
Just click on the red link and you will get to the English website.
Yeah.
Okay, and if you want to download the book, it's here. Just scroll a bit. So scroll. There you have it. You just click on the link, The Great Secret of Islam, for the pre-PDF edition.
Yeah. So guys, please check it out. I've read the book. It is very good. It's easy to read. It's easy to understand. It is not a complex presentation that requires an academic background. It's something anyone can understand. It's really lucid argument. Very
made
well.
A huge effort for the book to be understandable by non-native speakers. Actually, the book is written in a much better English than the one that I am speaking. But I think it is understandable, and I have had thousands of downloads from India, Malaysia, Africa, non-native English speakers, and I also had compliments from English native speakers on the quality of the language. But if we go back to our history, and to our presentation of the book, the first part, the part from divine revelation to post-Christianity, explains how Judeo-Nazarenism came into being. What was a creed? How did they stem from Judaism and Christianity, both? And what did they want to achieve? I explain here why did they came upon the idea of rebuilding the temple by themselves, instead of waiting for the Messiah, Jesus, to come back and build the temple as he was supposed to do in the early version of the Judeo-Nazarene Creed. Thereafter, with the part about the conquest of Jerusalem, I explain how the Judeo-Nazarenes made an alliance with some Arabs, with the Qurayshi tribe mostly, and what this alliance was about. There was an indoctrination process, and what the Judeo-Nazarene did is they had Qurayshi neighbors. Actually, the Qurayshi tribe is not from Mecca or the Hijaz. We have absolutely no trace of them there. Whereas we have traces, we have found archaeological evidence and traces in the sources of their presence in northern Syria, in the region of Latakia, Al-Ladikia,
that's interesting.
near Tartus. Tartus today is a big commercial port on the Mediterranean shore, Mediterranean coast.
Let's go to have a look on the map just so that we can give everyone a reference.
What you could do, Lloyd, is go on page. Let me just
on the map, on the book.
Yeah, in the book. In the book, there is something very, very interesting. It comes from Edouard Marie Gallet's work. It's on page 37. This is this map of ancient Syria, where based on the work of a French Orientalist, a geographer, and epigrapher, René Dussault, Edouard Marie Gallet identified 3 settlements areas for the Judeo-Nazarenes based on the names of the very small villages and the towns and so on. And you see this on the map, 1, 2, 3. There were 3 settlements areas for those Nazarene people in Syria.
Right.
There were also they settled elsewhere. They had settled in Jordan and maybe in Arabia too. And if you look at the yellow arrow, if you zoom in here, you will find something very peculiar. In the 1920s, René Dussault, so this French geographer, went there and he found the remains of the Khan al-Qurashiyeh. Khan al-Qurashiyeh means in Arabic the halting site of the Qurayshi tribe, or the caravanserai of the Qurayshi tribe, near the Qurayshi river, Nahr Qurayshi, which we see also on the map. This is hard evidence for the very ancient presence of the Qurayshi tribe there. And we gather from this how the Judeo-Nazarenes did the stuff. They had Arab neighbors, which they wanted to accustom to their own faith. They taught their Arab neighbors that they were sons of Ishmael, that they were cousins to them, cousins to the Judeo-Nazarenes, and so that they should share the same goal to conquer Jerusalem.
We love Jesus too. I mean, it's that kind of propaganda.
But and they had this idea of using the military potential of the Arabs to conquer Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. It's kind of the same as we see today. We see some hardcore Zionists who wants to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, making alliances with some Christians, telling them that they share the same goal, that by rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem, it will hasten the return of the Messiah. And this is exactly the same mindset. And this happened earlier. This happened in the 6th and 7th century.
Yeah.
And there was this indoctrination process and the Quran is the main piece of evidence for this, because this is what the Quran is about. The Quran is mostly a collection of teachings and preachings that were made in order to have the Arabs, the Qurayshis mostly, join the alliance, join the Arab Nazarene alliance, and to have them convert to the Nazarene faith.
Right.
This is what we read in the Quran. I have the last part of my book is about the study of the Quran, and I explain how we can prove, how we can find within the Quran what I am explaining right now.
Well, what if I were in the future to have you and Murad on together to go through some of the chapters and verses of the Quran and then do an interpretation? Because I think he's got some fascinating, mind-blowing information. And because I'm hoping to pair him up with Osama Dakdok later this week to get the two of them on, because with their knowledge of Arabic and having their own Quran translations from the original, from the Hafs and so on, I mean, the information that they share is just cracks my mind. It just breaks holes in my head because it goes against everything, but it makes so much sense. So by the same token, this interpretation, I mean, this is a very new thesis, but it's a sound thesis to my perception, and it's logical, and it tells us, look, there's evidence here that needs to be examined without being just dismissed. Just by the way, I want to mention, I see here there's Nazariya, so there's that. Hama was a city that in Syria which was leveled once, and not an outcry because the old saying, no Jews, no news. Hama was literally leveled by Bashar al-Assad's father because these guys were terrorists and they were fighting against the regime, and he completely flattened the city, basically just murdered everybody. But no one cared because it's Muslims killing Muslims. It's only a problem when Jews do it. And
since you're displaying the map, just west of Hama, you see Abu Kubais. Does it ring a bell?
It does, but I can't remember why.
Abu Kubais is nowadays in the vicinity of Mecca. It's
yes, I've been
Mecca.
in that region. I've been close to Mecca. Exactly. I couldn't get into Mecca, but I've been around Mecca.
This is something very, very interesting. You see, it's when, for example, the European settlers came into America, they gave names from their former places. There is a New York, a New Orleans, because there was a York and there was an Orleans in France. And what they did when they invented Mecca is that they took some names from their former history because they had memories from this history, actual memories.
So they transplanted these traditions into Saudi. I mean, Saudi was a fresh start. No history, no background, no competing narrative.
A blank page.
A blank page, exactly. I also want to mention that, if you go back to the 1920s, early 30s, the Palestinians, just slightly off topic, but the Palestinians were arguing, the lawyers for the Palestinians were arguing that, no, we are Syrian, we belong with Syria. It's crazy how this narrative has changed over the years. Just a question here from Mel, just your choice if you want to engage with this now or deal with it later at a different time, but your thoughts on the relevance of the question here.
Well, there is a question from our friend Mel, and it's not a difficulty at all because we have sources and evidence for the very oldness of these names. Actually, onomasticology, the science of the names of places,
of words and names.
It's a very, very interesting thing to study because actually most of our places, most of the names of our places are much older than what we think. Apart, for example, in the New World in America, when the settlers gave new names to everything, apart from this kind of configuration, most names are very, very ancient.
All right.
Besides, there is no point. For example, Mel, if you look at the Abu Kubais.
The Muslims speak of the Ansar, and this is right here in what, next to Damascus. This is in Syria. This is just north of Israel. That's interesting.
Exactly.
And yet they transplant them over to Saudi Arabia.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. It's the same.
Wow.
There is also something very interesting in when you study Syria. In Syria, there is a very strange religion, the Alawites. Alawites.
Yeah. Alawites. Yeah.
If you look into it, they are sort of Shia Muslims, but they are not really Shia. They pretend to be Muslims. Their religion is very, very strange. Not many people have studied it, but I have come across some books. When you look into it, they worship Muhammad, they worship Ali, and they worship a strange character from early Islam who is Salman al-Farsi.
Persian.
Supposedly, according to Muslim tradition, he was a Persian Jew who converted to Christianity and thereafter converted to Islam. And he was sort of very influential in the beginning of Islam. He's said to have taken part in the writing of the Quran. This religion is very, very strange. Actually, the main hypothesis for the existence of this religion is that it was founded by the Judeo-Nazarenes themselves.
Okay.
The Alawites would be the descendants of the Judeo-Nazarenes. And if you look at the map, you would see that the Alawite region, just look at the map around Ladikia and so on, just a bit upper. You have Tartus.
Yeah, there we go. Here we go. Yeah.
You see here Eta Alawite.
Mm-hmm.
This region from Latakia to Tartus is the core region of the Alawites. They dwell in the mountains there, and they kind of remain safe here because of the mountains. And it is the exact same region. In this region, we also find many traces of the ancient presence of the Judeo-Nazarenes. For example, you see the Wadi al-Nasara.
Mm-hmm.
Wadi al-Nasara, it could mean in an Islamic interpretation the valley of the Christians. But the word Nasara does not mean Christian. There is a word.
So this is a heresy, in other words. This is a heresy.
This is very strange. The Nasara, it is not an Arabic word per se. It became an Arabic word.
But I believe there was more than one group given that title, the Nasara. There was at least a few of them. It wasn't just one single group.
Yeah. It's a very complex topic because the meaning of the NSR root, actually the N-Tsa root in Hebrew and Aramaic, evolved during the centuries.
Mm-hmm.
Before Christianity, before Jesus, to put it a bit simpler, it's being a Nasara, being a Natsaraya, was related to the prophecy of Isaiah about the offspring of David. You know this prophecy? I think it's I don't have the reference in mind. But Natsaraya meant a descendant of David. When you were Natsaraya, you were someone from the Netzer meaning the offspring.
Yeah, the line of,
So when you say Jesus the Natsaraya, Jesus the Nazarene, it means that he is a descendant of David.
So that comes from Notzrim, the Notzrim.
Notzrim comes from the same root.
The same root, okay, yeah. Yeah, I wanted to bring the attention for the audience to this. I mean, this is incredible that you have this duplication here, and this comes prior to Saudi Arabia.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to tell us a bit more about this? I mean, this is mind-blowing stuff. I mean, as I said, the book, please, for the audience, download a copy, read it. It is an easy read. Won't take you very long. It is very logical. Everything is very well connected. You're not going to have to be bombarded with things to remember, to try to juggle. It's really the arguments make sense. They connect dot by dot. So really, please get a copy, have a read. It is an excellent read. Yeah. So about this, I mean, this is this coincidence? 3 coincidences in a row?
Is it coincidence? That's a good question. That's a good question. From a scientific point of view, you would have to put up a hypothesis. You would have the hypothesis of coincidence, and you will have another hypothesis, which would be that the scholars who created the Islamic narrative took the names from their ancient history in Syria, and they gave these names to places in Saudi Arabia where they started their new history. I think this is how some parts of the Islamic narrative were created. It was not created from scratch. They did not invent everything. They had core memories. They had some memories that could not be erased. They had to make do with those memories. Actually, what happened when the Caliph decided to create this divine legitimation for their power, and so when they decided that they needed a prophet, a book, and so on, they needed also a sacred history, but they could not create it from scratch because there were memories. You can change a book, you can destroy a building, but you cannot erase a memory. The only way to erase a memory is to kill every people who has this memory in mind. So it's a bit difficult. The best thing is to entangle the memory in another narrative. For example, if you have the memory of an Abu Qubais, where your ancestor used to live, you just name the new place Abu Qubais, and it will change your memory. Actually, this is what they did. They did not invent everything from scratch. Some parts of the Islamic narrative were invented from scratch, but most were deformation,
repurposing, association,
repurposing, exactly.
So yeah, I mean, this is I would believe that thesis. I mean, given your research, you've come to similar conclusions as I have. I mean, Mal's come to similar, Jay Smith and others. We're like, yeah, we're all converging. We seem to be converging. There's no serious divergence here, and we're all thinking, hold on, but they've borrowed things and they've reused things and they've, so yeah, it's a very, someone took the effort to do this.
What's very interesting is that most of the hypotheses I put forth in my book has been developed by Edouard Marie-Gallès 20 years ago. And 20 years ago, there were many, there were not as many stuff as we have today. We did not have so many archaeological findings. We did not have so many studies on ancient Quranic manuscripts. For example, 20 years ago, in this thesis, Edouard Marie-Gallès proved that the Muhammad occurrences in the Quran are actually interpolations. They were added. They were not in the earliest stage. They were not there at the earliest stages of the writing of the Quran. They were added later. He did this with a philological approach. It's a common methodology about the studying the structure of the text and so on. But what happened thereafter is that ancient manuscripts were found. And especially there is one that was found in Sana'a. It is not the Sana'a palimpsest. It is another one in which there is a folio which has the end of Surah 48. At the very last verse of Surah 48, there is an occurrence. I think it's at verse 29. There is an occurrence of Muhammad. And in this folio, the verse is absent. And it hasn't been erased. We see that in this folio, we let me just put it first in the book. In this folio, it's in note the footnote number 238. The manuscript ends, the Surah 48 in this manuscript, it ends at the 23rd verse, and it starts thereafter directly at Surah 49, verse 12. So it omits the Muhammad verse. So you see, you have here an evidence, and physical evidence for the theory, the hypothesis that Edouard Marie Gallès put forth 20 years ago in his book. This is something very, very interesting. It tells us that he was right at the time. Maybe he wasn't right on everything, and I've done some corrections on his thesis in his book. I've done this with him. But when you find confirming evidence and evidence that is as compelling as an ancient Quranic manuscript, it really tells us that he was right 20 years ago. And everything converges towards this.
You know, I've discovered, I went digging through some very, very old books written as much as 200 years ago. I mean, the Quran was translated, I think, in the 1600s into Persian and French. And you're looking at English and German scholars, especially in the 1800s, who are looking deep into this. And one of the prevailing views that you read when you come to these old scholars, and their research ended around, I mean, kind of around World War I, there was an interruption, but all of them tend to come to the conclusion Islam is a concoction. It's a soup that's just made up of a bunch of stuff jammed together. So, but the word concoction is the word that one particular scholar, well-known scholar, actually used. He says it is a concoction. It is a broth made up of, you pick the thing in it, they just jammed it together, and there you go, there's Islam.
Yeah, I agree. It's a concoction, but I think the main ingredient was Judaism. I don't know.
I mean, look, there's value in that you can see within the Sharia, they've taken a lot of Jewish law, even at some of the terms. They've clearly drawn from the Old Testament, from sort of, I call it pseudo-biblical, because it's not biblical. But then there's obvious and blatant Gnostic insertions into Islam. And there's also very clear pagan elements that from Southern Arabia, from Yemen, and also from East Africa that have been embedded in there. I mean, from ancient pagan religions going back to 800 BC at least. So you see some of these elements. They're all there. They're still there today. And also Persian borrowings. So you get, it is this concoction. But as you say, it's, but they try to, like a chameleon, try to look like a pseudo-biblical religion because that was popular at the time.
In order to appear legit at the time, you had to have something biblical-like. This is, you see, when you look into the Islamic narrative, you realize that it was written, the one who wrote it had constraints in mind. They had to make do with the memories, for example. They had to invent something plausible, coherent, logical. They had many constraints, and one of them was to make a religion that appeared as legit as Christianity or Judaism. And so they built their religion on the vague model of the biblical tales. They wrote the story of their prophet on the model of the biblical prophets, for example. The very idea of a prophet receiving God's word does not come from thin air. It comes from the Bible. And I don't know, an Aztec, for example, would an Aztec had invented this idea of God giving a revelation to a prophet? It's not a coincidence that everything happens within the same area where every biblical tale has been developed.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's even in the hadiths. I mean, that's another contentious discussion. I mean, not for us, but for Muslims. But there are references to Muhammad being a Sabi. He's someone which in the context that they try to present it is someone who's changed his religion, right? So Muhammad was a Sabi, and he gets called a Sabi. But for instance, there's a Jewish woman in one hadith that says Muhammad's a Sabi, and Muslims deny it as that's a false claim. But on the other hand, in other hadith, he is called a Sabi by his own people, right? Which is interesting. But then, of course, the context, the one is someone who changed his religion, and the other hand, he starts a new religion, but also there's the Sabi, in this case, seems to refer to the Sabians. Now, it could be the Sabaeans, the Yemeni Sabaeans, or it could be the Sabians. On balance, looking at the evidence, it seems to point towards the Sabians. Now, the Sabians, you go to Haran, then you're looking at moon worship, and you're also looking at this sort of pseudo-Gnostic, pseudo-biblical group, but also they claim in the Quran that the Sabians are people of the book, but they're clearly not. They're clearly sort of a pagan / Gnostic / moon worshipping group, which is nuts. So that this tells us there's a lot of odd things that need to be examined within the Quranic narrative and within the standard Islamic narrative. That there's confusion there. There's cover-ups. There's propaganda. There's oops, we made a mistake. We better try and cover this. But I mean, there's so much there that is a complete mess that makes no sense. But it tells you that there's something very crazy going on under the surface here.
It can make sense. Make sense when you look at it from when you try to have a perspective on it. When you look at the big picture and you realize that there was no Islamic Muhammad. It is a creation from the 8th and 9th and 10th century. But there were historical Muhammads, very different from the Islamic Muhammad. There were people at the time who bore the Mahmad or Muhammad title. Most probably it was
that title was Christian. I mean, that in the 5th century we can see that Christians were using that title for God, for the Christian God Yahweh, or for Jesus.
Christian and Jews. It is also used in some currents of Judaism to refer to the Messiah himself. But what I wanted to say is that there were figures, characters, actual historical characters in the 7th and early 6th centuries, and stuff happened to them. Memories were kept, and when the Islamic Muhammad was invented, they intertwined their inventions with memories, actual historical facts. And when we look into it with this perspective in mind, you can use the criterion of embarrassment, for example, to distinguish what is actually really historical in the Islamic narrative. And you can see that, for example, Muhammad being a Sabi, there is something that can be true. What does it mean? He changes religion. He become indoctrinated by the Judeo-Nazarenes. So there was a change.
Yeah,
there is something else. For example, in the Islamic tradition, tells us that when Umar ibn al-Khattab converted to Islam, so of course it's a complete fantasy. There was no Islam at the time, but when he converted, Muhammad baptized him. He poured some water on his head. It's in the Islamic tradition. What does it tell us about one of the historical characters, one of the historical Muhammad characters? Was he also a Mandaean or Sabian?
Well, I would say
current.
On this point, there's a very strong. There's clearly a current of Mandaism that, look, I've done a lot of work. You might know I've done like a couple of dozen episodes on Gnosticism, and I spent months going through the research and reading papers. I mean, just till it was coming out of my ears. But there's clearly a Gnostic element. I mean, in fact, it's blatant and explicit. It states so explicitly. It doesn't even hide it. It says we are a Gnostic religion in those words in the Sharia. It doesn't hide it. It says we are Gnostics. We do Gnostic things. Yeah, Gnostic as in the word Gnostic the way we know it, not in some other. We are Gnostics. We do Gnostic things. We are Gnostics. Thank you. It says so over and over. Muslim scholars have videos on YouTube explaining it if you just watch them, right? And we go, well, actually, we're smarter than that. Let us explain that you actually kind of, but so there's clearly a syncretism, a mixture of things, but also the Mandean influence, I would say yes. And then Bakar means baptized from CQ, and Abu Bakr, the baptized one, because you had also the baptizers, which and this became, I think there's a point where you get these Gnostics baptizers like the Mandeans and others, similar groups, very much related groups, and this eventually becomes the ablution ritual. So from because you had daily baptizers. You had groups who had this whole fetish about baptizing, and this I think becomes the ablution ritual. There seems to be an overlap there. Any thoughts on what he says here? Bakar means baptized. Abu Bakr. Any thoughts on that?
But I think there is a connection with the story of the story I just told about Muhammad baptizing Umar. We don't know whether Abu Bakr, the Islamic character, is an historical one. We have absolutely no trace of him outside of the Islamic narrative. There is no trace of him. And when we look at the Islamic narrative from a critical point of view, he may very well have never existed.
Yeah, so I've always said that Muhammad seems to be a composite because there were multiple prophets competing with Muhammad at the time in that period.
Exactly.
There were several monotheistic prophets that were around in that period. So there seems to be a composite from different eras, different personalities, and that's how they formed this perfect Muhammad figure.
Exactly. In the Islamic tradition, there is something very strange. It tells us about what it calls false prophets or anti-prophets. But if you look into it from an historical point of view, it cannot be. Muhammad was declared prophet of Islam in the 8th century. So there could not have been anyone called a false prophet or an anti-prophet in regard to Muhammad at the time of the historical Muhammad. That tells us that there were many other people preaching at the time. We have 4 names. We have many other names, but we have 4 main characters in the Islamic in the Islamic narrative. We have also within the 4 we have a woman. For instance, this is Sajja, a very interesting character, and one of these false prophets or anti-prophets is said in the Islamic tradition to have claimed to be an equivalent to Muhammad. He proposed to Muhammad. He asked Muhammad to make a sort of covenant or a pact with him, where they would have parted the world, one half for Muhammad and one half for him. So it's in the Islamic tradition. So there have been some alterations and modifications to the memories of the real events. But even with this modification, we can see that there was no unique prophet at the time. What happened in the early 7th century is that there were several movements of armed prophetism, armed Arab prophetism. Some were strongly influenced by Judeo-Nazarenes, but also were, for example, Christian millenarists.
Right.
Sajja was from Mesopotamia. She was a Christian, but she is seen as a prophet at the time. Actually, everyone who is interested in this topic should read Stephen Shoemaker's book, The Apocalypse of Empire, which explains the religious context of the time. Everyone thought at the time that the the end of times was near, that it was the apocalypse.
Mm-hmm.
So there were apocalyptical preachers,
right,
with a Christian background, some with a Jewish background, because Jews were also very, very deep into this apocalyptical thinking. They also thought that at the end of time, the Messiah would come and it would restore Israel and so on.
On that point, there is I believe there is a concept within rabbinic Judaism that if everyone would follow the law for 30 minutes, where there would be purity on earth for 30 minutes, this would create conditions that would bring the end times, would bring the eschaton. So there's this concept. So this may have made its way into Islam as well, because you spoke of we didn't even get to the utopianism. I just want to answer this question by Catherine. So does mean gnosis, may mean metamorphic transmutation. It literally says gnosis, the way that we understand the Gnostics within the Islamic Sharia. And if you listen to the scholars, there's hours of video on YouTube to listen. But that said, it doesn't mean metamorphic. It means just like the transmutation of lead into gold, which was alchemy. This is a spiritual alchemy. It's the same thing that the Marxists do. It's the same thing that happens in socialism, where you transform yourself and become the perfect man, just like you become the Übermensch with Nazism. You become the perfected man. So Muhammad was the Insan al-Kamil. He had found the formula to perfect his spirit and commune with God. It's actually a whole series of exercises that you do that eventually, occultic exercises that take you out of your mind, and you eventually exit your body, the prison of your body, and you enter into the throne room with Allah, and you commune with Allah, and you become one with Allah. And it's fascinating reading. It's actually part of the Islamic tradition, part of the Sufis. But yeah, that's something I haven't really delved into deeply. I have spoken about it on my channel, but it means an alchemical transformation of the soul, becoming the perfected man. That's what Muhammad was, and that's what they have to try to be. So on the one hand, it's merely just imitating him. On the other hand, the scholars try to become like him, connected directly to Allah. And in the Sirah, if you read the biographies of Muhammad, effectively the Gospels of Muhammad, he is Jesus. He is a part of Allah. He is literally a piece of Allah that was broken off. So he is a purity of Allah. He's not like the monad, which has lower and lower values of light that come from each. When they, what does the monad do? It emanates. Muhammad is literally a piece of Allah, and then all the other prophets, Jesus and everyone else, is a piece of Muhammad that has lower and lower quality as the generations go on. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that. I want to get back to a couple of things in the book, unless you want to finish your thought, because there were a couple of, you spoke about, I think we got to this point, the conquest of Jerusalem, the Messiah does not return. Do you want to just finish the summary of the chapters of the book, just so we can have an idea what the book covers? Because I mean, this overview itself is mind blowing. It's fascinating, But just to give everyone an idea of what it is, and because I'd love to come back and dig through each of these in more depth, go into detail, because that map itself that map changes the narrative. It gives us a whole new. It opens up a can of worms, So if you can tell us a bit more. Yeah.
Yeah, I can explain a bit about for example, the anarchy in Arabia part. What happened is that the Arab-Nazarene alliance finally took Jerusalem around 638. The temple was rebuilt in Jerusalem, and we have evidence for this in the 7th century sources, in the Islamic narrative, in the later sources. But what we know is that the Messiah did not come back. And according to the Islamic narrative, and also according to the 7th century sources, we see that starting from around 640, the Arabs who took power in Jerusalem and elsewhere started to fight among themselves. So this is why I've given this title, Anarchy in Arabia. And they fought among themselves on religious grounds. Who was legit? Who was to rule instead of the Messiah? And the war between the various Arab factions It's like in the Highlander movie. You have seen the movie. There
can only be one.
Only be one. And so the various factions eliminated themselves, and in the end, the strongest emerged, and the strongest was Abdul Malik. And Abdul Malik was a genius, a political and religious genius, a very, very strong figure in mankind's history. He had the genius not to invent something more, to say, I'm more legit than you all because, for example, you said you are a God's envoy. You say you are the commander of the faithful. You say you are the servants of Allah. He did not invent something more. He took every claim from his competitors and he applied them to himself. And by doing so, he sort of united all the factions under his rule. He was also very, very strong, which helps to unite the various factions. And
and Al-Hajjaj was his general, right?
Al-Hajjaj was a sort of a general, a prime minister, a commander in chief. He was someone very influential. What Abdul Malik did also is, I think, he was the one who compiled the Quran. Before him, we have absolutely no trace of a unified Quran. We have,
in fact, there's the mention of, I think, which Christian, I think it was the last Christian patriarch, mentions 4 books: the cow, the camel, the table, and the woman. 4 separate books. They don't mention the Quran. They mention multiple books. And the camel is, there's a portion of that referenced within the Quran, and the other 3 are now part of the Quranic corpus.
Yes, there is a story. We find it also in John of Damascus. He speaks of the Quran like this. But John of Damascus, it's in the 8th century. And one has to be careful when reading his writings about Islam, because it might have been modified after him.
Okay.
It might be at an even later stage. But what's interesting with Abdul Malik is that when you look into the Islamic narrative, he is said to have directed an edition, the final edition of the Quran. And he is the one who claimed that his edition was Uthman's edition. Actually, Uthman was his cousin from the same Umayyad family. And so if you look into, for example, Stephen Shoemaker's book, Creating the Quran, which is also available for free as a PDF file, you find it on his academia webpage. He makes a very strong thesis for Abdul Malik being the one who edited the almost final version, that's the book of the Quran. There is something also in the very structure of the Quran that gives us clues that he was the one who did it. When you look at the text, the structure of the Quran is very, very strange. It's all about fragmented narratives that are dispersed within the Quran. It's almost as if someone had a collection of text and cut them in little pieces, mix them all together, and made a book which and this new book was a new thing, and you could not tell that a chapter of the book was from an original writing. Do you see my point? My point is that if you take several writings, for example, from different factions, a faction had a collection, a narrative, another had another story, another book, and so on. You take everything, you cut into little pieces, you mix everything together, and because of this, one faction cannot claim a part of the book for itself. It is forced to accept the whole of the book.
Mm.
And it is a very clever way of unifying every faction, telling them, you don't have to fight among yourself anymore about who has the better book. I have the better book because I have every part of yours, and you cannot distinguish your part from the others, from the other.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, yeah, so they had a clean slate Quran. They blamed Uthman for destroying it and said, well, hey, luckily we've collected this thing together. Golly gee, aren't we lucky? And of course the Quran,
if
we
you
can
look
see
a little deeper into Abdul Malik's figure, we have physical evidence for that he was the first Arab ruler to claim the caliph title. We have this in his coins, and it's a very, very strong statement, because caliph does not mean originally, literally, does not mean successor of Muhammad. It means lieutenant or vicar.
tenant. Oh, vice regent, because
regent or vice regent.
Regent of Allah on earth. It's like the hand of Allah on earth, the ones who are fulfilling His will on earth.
Actually, what he wrote on his coin is Khalifat al-Ard, which means Caliph on earth. His title was not Caliph, but Caliph on earth, Caliph of God, God's Caliph on earth. So God's lieutenant on earth.
Yeah, so I've seen this concept as the vice regent, someone who carries out God's will on earth, and Muslims are carrying out God's will on earth, Allah's will. When we say God, we mean the biblical Christian God, the God of the Bible. But when Muslims say God, they mean Allah, and I kind of make a distinction between them. So it's Allah. I prefer to call him Allah because Muslims like us to use the term God, just like they say our Allah is the same as the Arabic Christian Allah. No, not quite. So,
but with Abdul Malik, we have it's a very significant step in the construction of Islam, because before Abdul Malik, the Arab leaders saw themselves in a biblical context.
Mm-hmm.
They were still referring to the God of the Bible. But with Abdul Malik, there is the beginning of the severance of the biblical roots of the Arab movement. Abdul Malik claims he has been chosen directly by God. Mm-hmm. He does not need the biblical explanation for his role.
Isn't that convenient?
So strong, so powerful, that it is obvious that God chose him as his lieutenant on earth.
That is very convenient. Can I just answer this question to Blue Baggins? I've put him in timeout for 30 minutes. Enjoy the break. Muhammad, well, in the standard Islamic narrative, right, of course, they claim to be an Abrahamic religion, part of the Abrahamic line. Mm-hmm. However, the Muslims only started to make the claim that they were Abrahamic after the Jews rejected them. So once the Jews rejected their claims, then they started to make the claim to give them legitimacy that they came from the line of Abraham. So that happened quite late in history. And in fact, if you look at the story of the Burak, right, where Muhammad takes the Burak, and there's a fascinating story within Islam where the Burak where Muhammad doesn't go up alone. He goes with, there's multiple versions of the story, but in this case, he goes up with the angel Jibrish. So he goes up with the angel Jibrish, but the Burak won't take Muhammad on his back. So the angel Jibrish punches the Burak in the face. I'm not kidding. And the Burak then, like after the Jibrish tells the Burak, the beatings will continue until until morale improves. And then once the morale improves, Muhammad gets on and they go up. And but that story actually was originally attributed much earlier to Abraham. It was attributed much earlier to Abraham, and also it comes from a poem. It is not a historical story. It is not a biblical story. It's a poem that was repurposed, and that poem comes 200 years after Muhammad. So that is not an early story as well. It's just insane how they do this. There's one other thing I want to point to. I want to just get your feedback on this, because we almost at 2 hours, so I typically try not to go that long, but this is great. I just want to show the audience and yourself, many of the audience will have seen this before. This is from a Muslim book by a well-known Muslim scholar who quotes very good, very solid, very famous Muslim scholars, what is commonly spread but not proven. In other words, fake stories about Islam from the Seerah of Prophet Muhammad, right? Famous but unauthentic. A beautiful word for fake stories from the Seerah of Prophet Muhammad. So let me just go through here. Let me just make it easy. And so we'll have a look here at Khadija. So let me start with that. So reports on his youth, his marriage to Khadija, and period before prophethood. So these are common, famous, very popular Muslim stories that are untrue. The report of the marriage of the Prophet to Khadija, while her age was 40, is from the weakest of hadiths. Now, Muslims love to tell us that's a weak hadith. You can't use it. Now, this is matruk, which is an even lower grade. It is said by Imam Ibn Kathir, she was 35 or 28 or 25. I am either 6 foot, I'm 7'5", or maybe I'm 5'3". So yeah, people don't really know, but I could be 67, I could be 53, I could be 21. It's really hard to tell. But here the thing is, they state here further that she must have been 25 years old because she had 6 children. How does a 40-year-old woman in the 7th century have 6 children after 40? So they say no, she was 25, which the implication, of course, is that now this claim that she was 40 years old comes from her cousin, I can't remember his name offhand right now, who claimed he himself was 120 years old. So people go, well, maybe not. So this obviously throws out the chronology. It clearly calls into doubt. So Muslim scholars agree that we also have issues in the Islamic narrative. Your thoughts on this particular report, and I'll do 2 more in a moment, but your thoughts on this, Odon?
Well, you know the Latin motto, asinus asinum fricat. The donkey rubs the other donkey. It's a donkey explanation. We are within the Islamic narrative. Nothing makes logical sense. Everything is completely artificial. There is no such thing as isnads or authenticity for hadith. If you want to claim authenticity for this, you have to do an historical critique, not to esteem the face or the reliability of the one who transmitted the hadith. This whole hadith scheme has been completely destroyed by modern scholarship. We know, for example, that the earliest hadith, the earliest layers of hadith, they have no isnad. They did not invent the isnad before the end of the 8th or the 9th century.
Yeah.
So there was this whole thing about claiming a hadith to be authentic or weak. It's just the way they cooked their narrative. It makes no historical sense. But what we can gather from these stories is maybe some historical truth has been transmitted, nonetheless.
But these are propaganda narratives, really. These are agendered stories with a particular...
We have to look at the context. When were these hadiths written? The first trace of them. Who commandeered the writing of the hadiths? What were the different factions, for example? Was there someone claiming to be a descendant of Muhammad, for example, and was he claiming power? And so they had to squander him by telling that Khadija could only have had 4 children and not 6, or something like this.
Yeah.
Actually, we cannot make history based on the hadith alone.
Yeah, I mean, all of these. But Muslims love to use these stories. I mean, they claim that Khadija was 40, and that's the standard narrative. Now we discover that even Muslim scholars say, no, that story is false. Then, for instance, Muhammad carried the luggage of a Jewish lady who wished to escape from Makkah after hearing of a man called Muhammad. An emotional but false narration. right? An emotional but false narration. Now, Muslims love to give us this story, but look how tolerant we are. And then if we look at the garbage story, the story of the Jewish lady who threw garbage at the Prophet is a false narration. So even Muslims acknowledged numerous false Islamic, popular but very popular Islamic stories. Guys, by the way, Odon, we did put your channel in the chat several times. Just remind people of your channel so that we know where to get it. And to the audience, thank you. I've got just over 280 people viewing. So thank you. It's really great to have a great audience. That's fantastic. Nearly 300. So yeah, guys, and thank you very much for all the great questions and for the supporters. Thank you. Yeah, but your thoughts on this? I mean, that there's no reason for us to feel awkward that we are questioning the Islamic narrative, because clearly Muslim scholars admit that the Islamic narrative in many cases is false, which tells us what else is false.
Yeah, even in a Muslim mindset, there are questions, many questions. But that's the thing with the Islamic narrative. It's a construction built on sand. It's not stable. It's not built on solid ground. There are thousands, hundreds of thousands of inconsistencies, discrepancies, oddities. You just have to look at various siras or various historical treatises. The best thing is to look at various tafsirs. Tafsir are Quran, Islamic explanations. I've done this for the Quranic study part of my book. I've read many 5 or 6 different tafsirs, and you see that the scholars, the top-notch Islamic scholars, have different explanations for the same stories, which means they do not know what the Quran is about. Every author invents his own explanation based on his own research and in his own thinking, and this is something that is that should be blatant even within Islam, that you don't know, you're Muslim, what you are talking about. You're trying to explain the text, the Quran, of which you don't know anything, actually.
Agreed. Yeah, amazing. Yeah, we've gone just a little under 2 hours. Wow. I mean, and we barely touched on
we had a lot of digressions, and we talked about Trinity, we talked about a lot of topics, but I'll be happy to unravel a specific topic for you if you want.
I would love to. Yeah, let me just do one thing. Someone asked me this question. Thank you very much for the donation that came in earlier. So thank you for your work. Even when you went away for a few weeks, I started eager to see new content. Thank you. I'd love to see some content on the problems of Quran only, the Quranist movement, and get your insights. It does seem to be growing rather quickly. Yeah, without going into too much depth, I'll give my view, my 5 cents for the moment. I mean, we can tackle that separately, and then perhaps you can throw in your thoughts. A couple of things. We're at the point now where archaeology, historical research and archaeology, and also the internet, and also just the growth of computer power, AI, the software that I use to go through hundreds of books, we are able to piece together the sources. We're able to piece together this narrative, and it's not looking good for Islam. And it's happening at a pace way faster than it did for the Bible in the 19th century. And I think this is a retreat position. It's a fallback position for a number of Muslims. They try to disqualify, they try to reject the wider hadiths and all the other things that have become part and parcel of Islam, and retreat to the Quran only as a defensive position, when in truth, if you ask a Muslim, okay, show me the names of Muhammad's wives in the Quran, they couldn't show you. Show me how to do the Islamic prayer, the one you do in the mosque every Friday, in the Quran. It's not in there. They can't. They must have these other sources. Yet on the other hand, this is a defensive position, because these other sources are becoming embarrassing for them. And many of these, there are a few of these Quranists, the Quraniyun as they're called, who are sincere, I would say so, but I think that's the minority, because according to the Sharia, if you're a Quraniyun or Quran only Quranist, you are an apostate. You are outside of Islam. you must accept, because as Islam is today, the hadiths and so on are wahi, they're revelation. They are considered revelation, and they are considered necessary to understand the Quran. And so yeah, that's just how that is. I think it's an eye blind. It's a way to get away from the embarrassment that they're discovering now within Islam, because we as non-Muslims, as Christians, at this point, I think we know the Quran and the Islamic stories and histories and literature way better than most Muslims do. Your thoughts, Odon?
I agree with you. There is no such thing. It's not possible, the Quran-only attitude within Islam. Even those who claim to be Quranists, actually, they might not know it, but they think with an Islamic lens. They think with Islamic concepts in mind, which are not in the Quran, such as the prayer, for example. Mm-hmm. The thing is that Islam has embedded Islamic concept within the mind of Muslims so deep that for them it is natural, for example, to think that Islam came into the world thanks to a prophet. They could not think things differently. They could not think Islam as being a construction, as having many influences. No, there must be a unique origin, a prophet. There must be a unique place of origin, a city, Mecca, for example. But those ideas, they are not within the Quran. They are from the Islamic narrative. And we as non-Muslim, we also are accustomed to this concept. And we look upon Islam with this concept in mind, even without being conscious of this. For example, the question of Muhammad, is it relevant to understand Islam? I've had many people asking me, who was the real Muhammad? But what's the sense of this question? This question makes no sense if you don't understand that Islam is a creation that was made, a process that took centuries. And Muhammad is a creation of this process. There was no prophet at the beginnings of Islam. Actually, there are several different beginnings of Islam. It did not begin in the 6th century. You have to go back to the biblical tradition, for example. You have to go back to Christian ideas. You have to go back to the Judeo-Nazarenes. You have to go back to Gnostic ideas, Ethiopian influences, Persian influences, and so on. So the idea of having a unique prophet revealing the religion makes no sense from the big picture perspective. And this is what's really sad with these people who think they can avoid Islam difficulties by being Quranists. The only thing, if they are really true to themselves, the only thing that they will achieve is, in the end, they will leave Islam, because they cannot justify their belief by the Quran only.
Right. Yeah, someone says here he's an archetype. I mean, yeah, he's a composite. So he's something that they needed to hold it all together. I mean, besides, they reject Jesus. Sure, they claim to accept him, but really they reject the foundational Christian beliefs, the resurrection. They reject the Trinity. So they try to mimic that they accept it, but that's really just a very thin veneer over a complete rejection of the Christian concept. But it's close enough to fool some people, and it's not, by no means is it Christian, by no means is it. I mean, yeah, but you can see it's got all of these elements. So yeah, wow, just under 2 hours, just about to go there. Yeah, final thoughts from you before if you'd like to do another one next weekend, I'd be very open to it, because I mean, this was a fantastic conversation. I had so many surprises. No?
We've only scratched the surface of things. And really, I'm your man. I'm at your service. If you want me to do other presentation of any topic, I can do one, for example. I've done one recently about the making process of the Islamic narrative, how the Islamic narrative was created.
That would be great.
I've got a presentation ready. I can do also on the anything on the coins, for example, or on the Quranic studies.
Coins are powerful, but you know how the narrative was created. That would be very interesting. And at some point, also, I'd love to get you and Murad together, because I'm planning to get him and. Sorry?
I had a discussion with Murad on my channel, and I feel very frustrated.
Why?
Because it was too short. And also, I want Murad to publish his translation. I really, really, really long for it.
I have told him. It's imminent. I told him. I went to him and I said, Murad, take my money, and it didn't work. Maybe I need to get more money. I don't know. This is Murad. If you're listening, take my money. I just don't know what. Yeah, I know. I'm waiting too. We're all waiting, but I want to get him and Osama Daktuk on next weekend as well, sort of next Friday possibly, to discuss the Quran itself. And I mean, but this, having these discussions with yourselves who've done this research, written the books. I mean, we are finding things here. They are, and we're converging. We're not disagreeing. We're actually converging, which is very interesting.
Yeah, we are living a very, very exciting time. Because to wrap it up and to come back to our introduction, it is the same with early Christianity. We are, with many, many, many topics. We are living a sort of knowledge revolution.
Mm. Tell me, last question from me. What impact? Because I think the evidence is becoming clear. The archaeology is indisputable. The literature connections, as we're discovering these and so on, the historical evidence is starting to become very, very clear on one side of the argument. What impact is this going to have, do you think?
There are several consequences. I would like to develop 2 points there. The first one is the collapse of Islam. Islam is collapsing, but it doesn't mean that every Muslim will renounce Islam. What will happen is that Muslims will be forced to take a stance. Either they reject Islam because they understand that it is false, that the narrative is false, that we have a tremendous amount of evidence for it, for this. But there will be also many hardcore Muslims who will reject this. In spite of the blatant evidence, they will close their mind to reason and become more and more hardcore. And this sort of judgment between within the Islamic world will lead to, I fear it, much violence.
Yeah, it's not going to go down easily, but I think it's crumbling. I think it's starting to cause doubt. I think
we do not see it in the Western world because we only see the Muslims that are there in Europe or in the US, mostly in Europe. And those Muslims, most of them are militants. They are really convinced that they are doing God's work or Allah's work by Islamicizing Western countries. And so the situation is very different in Muslim countries where we see that Islam is collapsing. We see, for example, that the majority of the young Turks, the Turkish people, are not Muslims anymore. We see, for example, that Egypt was forced to take a law to pass a bill against atheism because it became a national issue. We see that in Algeria, the regime has been forced to close churches because they were multiplying and they feared for the cohesion of the state. We see that in Tunisia, for example, a third of the population declares that it has no religion. It is not Muslim, even though the power has been taken by the Muslim Brotherhood. So things are very different in the Muslim world. And I have a second point, which is connected to the first. This study of the origins of Islam helps us to understand the very deep nature of Islam. I think Islam, in its core, in its most profound core, is a global political messianism. It has been so even before it was called Islam. In the 7th century, with the Judeo-Nazarenes and the millenarist preachings, it was all about a global political messianism, which is the idea that thanks to a political program, you could get rid of evil. You could have a sort of perfect world, and without evil, and everything will be fine and so on. And this way of thinking.
Odon, I'm going to say something controversial on that point. I agree with you, but I'm going to say something controversial on that point that some of the audience may need to take a moment to understand, because I've done hours discussing the Reformation, but I see a parallel there with the Reformation.
There is
and which was a political movement, and it was a puritanical movement that also wanted to overcome evil and kill evil. And there's certain, I mean, when I've done numerous hours, and I've only done roughly half of my episodes on Luther. I'll start those up again shortly to go back through my Martin Luther series. But there are things in Martin Luther's writings that aren't the standard Lutheran narrative, let's just say. But once you read through his works and analyze them, there's some very disturbing things in that man's mind that got put on paper. And I'm seeing a parallel here. It's crazy because as you read through Martin Luther's writings, you start to see an Islamic parallel, a Manichaean parallel, and you see the same things in Islam. And it's very disturbing to see those ideas, that convergence there. It's really disturbing.
And what's interesting is when you understand this, what global political messianism is, then you can try to have serious discussions with Muslims on topics that make sense for them. So what I've come to understand is that Muslims are much more interested in discussing the issue of evil, the issue of cleansing the world from evil, than discussing the historicity of Muhammad or Mecca and so on. And it's one of the main benefits from all those studies. You get to understand Islam very profoundly, and because of this, you have arguments. You can develop new ideas to discuss with Muslims. This could be another topic for further discussion, because it is a topic in itself.
It's worth discussing how to do the apologetics, how to do the evangelization on the basis of this information, how it will be received, how they'll defend, how to overcome those objections. That's an interesting topic.
You see, I'm watching the apostasy sphere in the French Twitter or X now, or YouTube, and all the social networks, and I've seen it's been 10 years since I'm active on internet on these topics, and I've seen things change a lot. I mean that there are more and more Muslims quitting Islam and becoming agnostics or atheists. They quit Islam because they realize it is false, because of the historical critique, because of everything they find on the internet. But there is nothing waiting for them outside of Islam. They become atheists, and they join the ideological movements that exist in our society. So they will be advocates for I don't know, for the green planet, or for the many progressive movements that rule us. And those movements, like, I don't know, the woke movement, or LGBTQ, or the idea that thanks to economic growth, everyone could achieve happiness. There are many progressive movements. They are actually exactly like Islam. It's a bit like the Reformation you talked about. They all stem from the same idea that one could cleanse the world from evil. So they don't have the same definition of evil. For Islam, evil is not doing God's will.
Actually, technically, yeah, Islam doesn't have the sense of right and wrong as we have it in Christianity or the West. They have what is legal and what is illegal, and and what is illegal can be made legal given certain legal conditions, or certain. I mean, it's really flexible. It's a very relativistic moral system, you want to call it that, but it's not a moral system. It's a legal system with caveats. Sorry?
It's a legal system that uses the alibi of God, because God is not involved here. It's all a matter of actually, the real judge of Muslim is not God, it's the Muslim community. When a sin is committed, it's not committed against God, it's committed against the Muslim community, and it is the Muslim community who performs the judgment.
Yeah, the vice regents
who gives the punishment.
Yeah, they are the vice regents on earth carrying out the word of Allah, the will of Allah.
God doesn't care about Muslims. Even in the Islamic conception, God has no interest in men and in Muslims. So everything is human stuff. But there is exactly the same mindset in the modern society. If you take the woke movement, for example, it has its own definition of evil. Evil being our system that represses the gender affirmation, for example. And there is this idea that when you perform a political program, so it's not God's law here, it's something else, it's new laws that will enable people to change the gender, for example. Should such a system be enforced, there we will have a perfect world of happiness, everyone will be happy, and so on. It is the same worldview as in Islam. And my point is that we see many...
All of these rules, it's like a rule-based morality.
Excuse me, Lloyd, excuse me. I didn't get...
No, like a rules-based morality, like Islam has a list of rules. Do this, do this, do this. And the woke movement is very similar. Do this, do this, do this. And you'll...
It's not only the woke movement, it's every ideology based on progressiveness. The Enlightenment movement, but it's Marxism, communism...
Socialism. Marxism is just one form of socialism.
Socialism, all the variants. Here in Europe, for example, we have... the European Commission that has developed such an ideology. If you take, for example, the World Economic Forum, its chairman, Klaus Schwab, he wrote a book, The Great Reset, where he has a plan for the happiness of mankind, which will be enforced through a political program.
It's the Sharia.
Exactly the same mindset. The same mindset. There is good, there is evil, and we as humans, we have the means to get rid of evil. But as we were discussing it before going live, we were referencing Solzhenitsyn. Solzhenitsyn, I've quoted him in the conclusion of my book. He told us that there is no such thing as the the good guys and the bad guys. There is no such thing as good and evil being essentialized as parts of humanity. He says that the division between good and evil is within our own hearts. There is no such thing as the bad guys and the good guys. We are all bad and good in the same time, and so we have to work on ourselves to better ourselves. So it can be an easy conclusion for for chat.
Yeah, we have a Gnostic in the chat. Go to God is a Gnostic. He might not know it, but he's spouting Gnostic ideology. So yeah, I'd like to sort of end here. I've gone longer than I typically do, but but we can chat again further on some of these topics. We've touched on various things. So next week we can do something. I'll be available. 20th to 27th, I'm traveling, so I won't be available. I'm gone for a week, but before then, so yeah, any final word? Because I've posted your link in the chat multiple times, so everyone can find your site and your book and download it.
The final word would be, if you want my book, it's available for free on my website. You have the link. It's thegreatsecretofislam.com. And the very final word would be the exact quotation from Solzhenitsyn, which is, the line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties either. And I would add, nor between infidels and unbelievers, but right through every human heart.
Yeah, powerful. No, thank you. So guys, thank you. I hope that was enlightening. Please go to the website, download the book, read it, look through the chapters. It is a fascinating read. It is incredible information, really well presented, very well written. You're going to really learn a lot. It is fantastic thesis. It is long overdue. So please read it and share it. Tell people about it. And we'll be back soon to have another discussion. I'll be online tomorrow, finally, with the fourth attempt with Gurumit Singh. He has confirmed he will be on tomorrow. He is one of Tommy Robinson's friends and one of the early founders of the EDL and its spokesperson. And now, of course, we're going to have a discussion about what's going on in the UK. And yeah, there are some issues there. But Odon, we shall come back in a week. Let's do this again, and hopefully, yeah. And I'll talk to Murad. I sent him an email earlier today to talk about him and Osama. But it'll be great to have you guys on as well, and have this discussion. I mean, there's so maybe with Osama as well, because that'll be a fantastic panel as well. Because the evidence is starting to pile up, and we're starting to see things we've missed before, and things are changing fast. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lloyd, and see you soon then.
So guys, yeah, thank you to the audience. God bless. Thank you for all the support, and we shall see you guys soon. Take care, everyone. Good night.